Sophia had always been the level-headed one in her family, the one who kept her cool no matter what. So when her parents, younger brother Max and boyfriend Jake, offered to drive her to her new university dormitory, she felt confident that it would be a smooth trip. They left early in the morning, hoping to make the most of the day and get her settled in before dark. The journey started off well, with everyone in high spirits. They laughed, sang along to the radio, and talked excitedly about the new chapter in Sophia's life. But as they left the main highway and entered the winding forest road that would take them to the university, the mood began to shift. The forest was dense, with towering trees that blocked out the sun, casting deep shadows across the road. The deeper they drove into the woods, the darker it became. The atmosphere in the car grew tense, the conversation dwindling as they focused on the road ahead. Sophia glanced at Jake, who was sitting beside her in the back seat. He gave her a reassuring smile, but she could see the unease in his eyes. Max, who had been playing games on his phone, put it down and stared out the window, his expression serious. As they rounded a particularly sharp bend, the car's headlights caught something up ahead, a figure standing in the middle of the road. Sophia's father swerved to avoid, bringing the car to a screeching halt. Everyone in the car froze, their hearts racing. What was that? Sophia's mother whispered, her voice trembling. Before anyone could answer, the figure moved. It was a man dressed in tattered clothes with wild, matted hair and eyes that seemed to glow in the darkness. He stood there, staring at them, his expression twisted into a malevolent grin. Sophia's father tried to reverse the car, but the engine sputtered and died. The man took a step closer, and then another, until he was right in front of the car. He reached out a hand, blood dripping from his fingers, and placed it on the hood. Suddenly, the car was plunged into darkness. The headlights flickered off, and the interior lights dimmed. Sophia felt a chill run down her spine as the air around them grew colder. She reached for Jake's hand, squeezing it tightly. Then, without warning, the man vanished. The darkness lifted, and the headlights flickered back on. But something was wrong. They were no longer sitting together in the car. Sophia found herself alone in the middle of the forest, the trees towering ominously above her. Panic set in as she called out for her family and Jake, but there was no response. The forest was eerily silent, the only sound being the crunch of leaves under her feet. She began to run, desperate to find her family. As she stumbled through the trees, she suddenly heard a blood-curdling scream. It was Max. She ran toward the sound, her heart pounding in her chest. But when she reached the clearing, she froze in horror. There, lying on the ground, was Max. His body was covered in blood, his eyes wide open, staring lifelessly at the sky. Sophia choked back a sob, unable to comprehend what she was seeing. But before she could react, she heard another scream. This time, it was her mother. Sophia turned and ran in the direction of the sound, her breath coming in ragged gasps. She burst into another clearing, only to find her mother lying on the ground, her throat slashed. Tears streamed down Sophia's face as she fell to her knees. She couldn't understand what was happening. It was as if she were trapped in a nightmare. Suddenly, she heard Jake's voice calling her name. She scrambled to her feet and ran toward the sound, desperate to reach him. But when she found him, it was too late. He lay in a pool of blood, his body mangled and broken. Sophia screamed, the sound tearing through the silence of the forest. She collapsed beside Jake, her mind reeling. How could this be happening? How could she lose everyone she loved in a matter of minutes? But then, just as suddenly as it had begun, the nightmare ended. Sophia opened her eyes to find herself back in the car, her heart racing. Her family and Jake were all there, seemingly unharmed, but their faces were pale, their eyes wide with fear. They were driving out of the forest, the trees thinning as they approached the university. No one spoke, the terror of what they had just experienced hanging heavily in the air. Sophia glanced at Jake, who looked as shaken as she felt. They had all seen the same thing. Each of them had witnessed the other's brutal deaths. As they pulled up to the dormitory, Sophia's parents tried to offer comforting words, but the shock was too great. The horror of what they had experienced in the forest lingered, even as they helped her settle into her new room. Later that night, as Sophia lay in bed, she couldn't stop thinking about the events of the day. What had happened in the forest? Was it a twisted vision, a shared nightmare, or something more sinister? And why had it happened to them? As she stared at the ceiling, sleep eluding her, Sophia's thoughts drifted to the students who had gone missing a year ago: Sarah, Jack, Emily, Alex, and Ryan. Could there be a connection between their disappearance and the terrifying events she and her family had just experienced? The question gnawed at her, filling her with a sense of dread that refused to fade. Sophia knew one thing for certain: whatever dark forces were at play, they hadn't finished with her yet.